As we move across the junction into Gilly Gate, originally called St Giles Gate, on the right-hand side of the bus, just above the shop windows, you will see a black lamp on the wall. Look behind the lamp and you can see a small white cat. You'll see lots of these cats all over the city's buildings. Originally put there as good luck charms in Victorian times, later they became a trademark of a local architect called Tom Adams. These cats have become a feature all over the city. On the right, you can see some of the buildings have bricked up windows on the first floor. This comes from the Georgian window tax. In 1696, a law was passed on which owners were taxed on the amount of windows their property had. To avoid paying this tax, windows were bricked up. These days, when something is expensive, you'll hear people say, "That's daylight robbery." It is possible this saying comes from the old tax. You either paid up or lost your daylight, hence daylight robbery. On the left, at the end of Gilly Gate, is the former Salvation Army citadel. It stands on the site where St Giles Church used to stand. It is one of the very few churches in York we know very little about, possibly due to the fact its graveyard was used to bury the bodies of victims of the plague in 1605. It may also have been used for burying the bodies of executed criminals until 1693. In Lord Mayor's Walk, look to the right and we will get a nice view along the city walls. You can still see the defensive moat at the foot of the walls. This once would have been full of filthy water and rotten waste. Behind the wall, to the right, you can see York Minster, or to give it its proper title, the Cathedral and Metropolitical Church of St Peter in York. It is both a minster and a cathedral. The name Minster derives from the Latin monasterium. From here, the local monks would go out to teach or minister. It is also a cathedral because it contains the throne of a bishop. This is taken from the Latin cathedra and means seat. In York's case, the seat of an archbishop. Keep looking on your right, and as we turn, you will see Monk Bar, which is the tallest of York's gateways, standing at 63 feet, or 19.2 metres in height. On the top stand life-size stone figures known as the Wild Men of York. Legend says they will come alive and throw their boulders down onto anybody daring enough to attack the city. As we leave Monk Bar, look along the street to your right, and set back, you can see the wonderful county hospital, built in 1850, which is now used as apartments. Keep looking to the right, and you can see some older buildings on Monkgate, dating from the 17 and 1800s. Any earlier buildings on this street were destroyed in the Siege of York in 1644. On the left, by the blue road sign, set back behind the railings, is a garden in the style of an Elizabethan knot garden. It was thought to be introduced as a selling feature for what was the design shop next door. It is not very historic, but we think it's very nice and worth pointing out. We are moving flowing into Fossbank and running alongside York's second river, the Foss, on our left. It probably gets its name from the Latin word fossa, which means ditch or stream. There is no longer any commercial river traffic on the Foss, which was made into a canal in 1792. Today, both the Ouse and the Foss are mainly used by pleasure boats and wildlife. If you look to your right, you will see that the city walls come to an end. That's because a wall was not needed at this side of the city due to the King's Fish Pool, which formed a man-made defence against attack. This is one of the reasons people think the walls aren't complete. It is because there seems to be sections missing. The walls never completely circled the city, as there was no need for a wall where they met water. There would have been a tower at the end of the wall known as a postern. It was demolished in 1829 to make way for traffic. If you look to the left, there is a 15th century timber-framed house, now the Black Swan pub. The Black Swan claims to be one of the most haunted pubs in York, but to be fair, most pubs in York claim to be either the most haunted or the oldest. It does have some rather intriguing ghosts in there though. It has a grumpy old man who sits at the bar, but nobody ever buys him a drink. A young lady sits looking into the fire, but nobody has ever seen her face. And a pair of legs which run around, bringing a whole new meaning to the phrase, getting legless in a pub. This brings us into Stonebow. This is our nearest stop for York's most famous street, the Shambles, the medieval cobbled street of the butchers, the market, the city centre shops, and the merchant adventurers' hall. Please alight here for any of these places. Just past the church hall of St Crux on the right is the Shambles, York's most photographed street. The Shambles probably gets its name from an old Danish word, fleshamels, which means the street of the butchers. The flesh was the meat, and the shamel was a large window ledge outside the shop where meat would be displayed. Now just imagine you were shopping for your Sunday roast in medieval times. Your meat didn't come pre-packed in plastic trays and delivered by lorry. It walked in straight from the market in Monkgate. The animals were slaughtered in the backyard with the blood and guts running down a channel in the centre of the street, whilst the offal was left to rot. The plagues which hit York between the 14th and 17th centuries probably started in streets like the Shambles. Today all the butcher shops have now gone, and the street has been cleaned up and caters mainly for the tourist trade. Looking ahead is the Church of All Saints pavement, which has a beautiful lantern tower instead of a spire. In medieval times, a fire used to be lit in the top of the tower in order to guide travellers safely back to the city. There was no street lighting then, and so York was not as easy to find after dark as it is today. Also, York was surrounded by a great forest, the Forest of Gold Trees. It was dangerous to be lost there at night, as it is recorded that there were wild animals and robbers in the forest. It doesn't get its name from the metal copper as you might think, but from kupra, the Norse word for cup maker. It was when the new Coppergate shopping precinct was being built in the late 1970s and early 1980s that over 40,000 finds from the Viking settlement were unearthed, beautifully preserved by the Satan mother Roundtree. What was found here is so important that it even changed the way we teach about Vikings in the National School curriculum. Today you can see what was found in the Viking Centre, where you can travel back in time over 1,000 years in York's history to experience the sights, the sounds and even the smells of Viking York. You can visit the Viking Centre from our next stop, but please remain seated until we arrive at the Clifford's Tower stop. As we move into a relatively modern street, Clifford Street, on the right, the York Dungeon is housed in the grand old Victorian Institute of Learning. It tells the grisly side of York's history, recalling tales of torture and misery, and stories of characters such as Dick Turpin and Guy Fawkes. Clifford's Tower is on our left. It was part of the castle complex that was built in 1245, but it is not the first castle to stand here. Originally, there were two castles, one either side of the river. They were built by William the Conqueror's men in 1068 and made of wood. William didn't have it all his own way in the north, and a year later the locals burnt down the castle in a rebellion. Clifford's Tower is on our left. It was part of the castle complex that was built in 1245, but it is not the first castle to stand here. Originally, there were two castles, one either side of the river. They were built by William the Conqueror's men in 1068 and made of wood. William didn't have it all his own way in the north, and a year later the locals burnt down the castle in a rebellion. William was furious and sent his troops to quell the rebellion. He did this in a brutal fashion, an event which is now referred to as the Harrying of the North, where he burned everything between York and the Newcastle area. Buildings, animals and crops were all destroyed, but he didn't stop there. It is believed he got his troops to salt the soil so nothing could grow. Many thousands died due to his actions. The rebellion was over. Are still held in the same cells the offenders were held in over 200 years ago. This is due to the building being a Grade 1 listed property, so it cannot be altered inside or out. On the left you can see the last remaining section of the castle wall. Look left as we pass the circular drum tower, and you can see where the drawbridge would have been at the base of the wall. Ahead we can see a square tower marking the end of this section of the city wall. This is Skeggate Tower, which stands where the wall met the River Foss, which would have been much wider than it is today. There were 6 postern towers on the walls of York. Postern means rear entrance, and this is the only such tower still remaining. As we turn into Lead Mills Lane, look to the right. On the wall of the tower, just above head height, is a stone projection sticking out. This projection is part of a garderobe, which is a medieval toilet chute. The waste would come out of the chute and drop directly into the King's Fish Pool down below. Over the hedge to our left is the graveyard of St George's Church, which has just one upstanding headstone in it. Those on the bottom deck may see this headstone through the gates on the left as we turn. This is the grave of Dick Turpin, the notorious Georgian highwayman who robbed stagecoaches in the 18th century. Dick Turpin was buried in the graveyard of the original St George's Church in 1739. Since his death, Turpin has become a romantic figure in English history, but the truth is far from the legend. The legend tells of a man who rode a horse called Black Bess. He would jump out from behind trees in front of stagecoaches shouting, "Stand and deliver, your money or your life." It was at this point you would give him all your money, and everybody would go home happy. In truth, he was believed to be a thief, a poacher, a burglar, and a murderer, not a nice man. And he never had a horse called Black Bess. That was made up about 100 years after his death, in a novel called Rookwood, by the Victorian novelist Harrison Ainsworth. Turpin was actually from Essex, but came to York to avoid capture using the assumed name of John Palmer. laid low at a place just to the east of York, but one day the landlord's cockerel was keeping him awake, so Turpin shot it dead. It wasn't the cleverest thing to do, as it got him arrested. He was brought to York for trial, where he was found guilty of the more serious crime of being a horse thief. He was taken out to the Tyburn on the Knaves Mire, where he was hanged in 1739. Straight ahead of us is Monkgate Bar, the most complete gateway on a city wall, not only here in York, but also in the United Kingdom. This is because it still retains its barbican, which is the tunnel-like structure on the outside of the gateway. We will see the barbican when we turn right. You will not see another original barbican attached to it, with the soldiers throwing all kinds of nasty things down from above. In 1828, the city's cattle market was relocated to this area. Cattle and sheep were brought here from all over the country to be traded. The flat grassed areas at the foot of the walls were where livestock were kept in pens awaiting their sale. In 1971, the market was moved again, this time to Merton, a village just outside of York, and was renamed the York Livestock Centre. On our left is the Barbican Leisure Centre, which is named after the Barbican at nearby Monkgate Bar. This is where the UK Snooker Championship has been held many times, and it is also a music and entertainment venue. There would have been lots of pubs in Skeggate when the cattle market was situated here. All of the pubs on our right had their front doors facing towards where the cattle market would have been, all except one. The Edinburgh Arms was built facing the opposite way to the other pubs because it was built for the Scottish cattle traders. It is said that the Scots didn't want to be seen in the same pubs as their English counterparts, so after a day's drinking, the English would come out of their pubs on this side of the street and the Scots would come out of their pub on the other side of the street. It would keep them apart. Looking ahead, we can see the top of York Minster. It is the tallest structure in York. What we want you to see is the Minster, not a tower block. The present Minster has had 3 fires in 1753, 1829 and 1984. It was because of the fire in 1829 that the Minster Police were formed, one of the oldest police forces in England. We move on to Skeggate Bridge and cross the River Ouse, York's main river. Look to your right to see Ouse Bridge, the oldest of the bridges built in 1821, replacing various older bridges dating back to Viking times. Look to your right, and you will see the city walls at Bale Hill, a grass mound with trees growing on it. Bale Hill was the site of William the Conqueror's second castle, dating to around 1068. Nothing remains of it, however, because it was only ever made of wood, and nobody wanted to pay for its upkeep. Eventually, it was found to be in such a sad state of repair, it was pulled down. On our left is an area known as Clementthorpe, named after the Norman church and nunnery of St Clement. Bishopthorpe Road ahead will take you to the village of Bishopthorpe, which is where you'll find Bishopthorpe Palace, home to the Archbishop of York. Also along Bishopthorpe Road, before the village of Bishopthorpe, you will find access to York Racecourse, on the area known as the Knaves Mire. As we set off through the lights, look left and keep looking left for a brief chance to see the smallest house in York. Watch out for the house at the top of the hill with a large black door with number 76 on it. Just after it, look in the gap and there is a door with the number 76A on it. This claims to be the smallest house in York. We are now in an area of Victorian and Edwardian York. With the arrival of the railways to York in the 1800s, the city grew rapidly. More houses were needed to accommodate the growing population, which had shot up from 17,000 in 1801 to a staggering 77,000 by 1881. These new suburbs were built outside the city walls, with back-to-back terraces to house the people who had come to York to work on the railways and in the chocolate factories. Once the railways had arrived, York became much easier to get to and quickly became quite a tourist destination for the middle classes. No longer did you have to make the long and dangerous journey down south for entertainment by horse-drawn carriage, and so York soon became the leisure and pleasure capital of the north. The Roundtree family were prominent Quakers, and unlike many other employers in those days, they were careful to look after their workers, providing their staff with a medical centre, canteen, library and even a swimming pool on the factory site. Rowntrees also introduced pensions and paid holidays, something that was unheard of in Victorian times. They also gave public parks to the city, such as Roundtree Park and the Homestead Park in Clifton. In Camplesham Road, we pass a modern housing estate known as the Chocolate Works, which gives a clue to what was in this area. Behind the buildings on the left, you can see a brief sight of what remains of the Terry's chocolate factory. Sadly, Terry's no longer makes chocolate here in York. The factory was closed down in 2005 and production was moved elsewhere. Its most famous product, the chocolate orange, is now made in Europe. If you look through the trees on the left at the clock tower, can you spot what's strange about it? It has no numbers on the clock face, just the letters spelling the words Terry York, a reminder of over 200 years of chocolate making in the city. Those who lost their lives in the First and Second World Wars. This is our nearest stop for the National Railway Museum. If you take a trip around the National Railway Museum, you will find something in there for everyone, not just the rail enthusiast. Do allow plenty of time for your visit there, as the museum is huge. It is also every Yorkshireman's favourite place to enter. Free.